caveat when you have an identical twin sister that you should just like prepare people to freak out when you walk into a new space. So I appreciate that. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Teresa Chin. I'm a producer and designer with Youth Radio, which means you get to judge all my font choices. That's very appropriate. And I'm just curious, has anyone ever heard of Youth Radio, maybe heard us on the radio? Ooh, cool, people listen to the radio, awesome. So I want to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit. We are a production company based in Oakland, and we produce stories as Youth Radio's official youth desk, as NPR's official youth desk, but also for National Geographic, Huffington Post, Fusion, The Atlantic. But beyond, or actually really behind those stories, is a lot of investment in the community that I think is important to recognize for this section called Participate. How can we engage communities to participate in our stories if we don't first invest in them and become a part of them? So when you walk into Youth Radio, what you might see, if I can get this to play. Point forward. Point up. Point forward. I'll just start talking and hopefully we'll get it working. So this is our building based in downtown Oakland, and if you're to walk in, what you would see on our first floor is young people ages 14 to 18 who are working on computers building media. When a young person comes to Youth Radio, which is free, which is based in the community, we do at least 6 months of free training trying to go and move them from consumers of media into producers of media. And that's a rather big shift, especially for somebody who's so young. Part of that mission is to put people on the mic in the first week of them coming in and saying, not we're going to give you a voice, because I believe that people in our communities, young people, they already have a voice. It's going and showing them platforms and amplifying that voice into places where people can hear their message. Flamingos. You know, I used to actually be a zookeeper, so the flamingos are kind of appropriate when you think about it. I could definitely do 12 minutes on flamingo stories, but I don't think that's why they want me to be here. Do you love the music? I know you love the music. So yeah, like I said, this is kind of what it's like to come into our building and into our space. We have young people who are producing not just for broadcast radio, but producing stories for mobile interactive, which I'll be sharing a story about that. Young people are pitching stories. Young people are reporting, doing interviews. Young people are cutting their own stories and editing them. And I think you saw a glimpse there, just like show how awesome we are. This is making media that matters. We've won Peabody Awards. We've won awards alongside, adult produced media. I think it's important because just because you're a young person, you might be told, like, stop asking questions. When we say participate, we're saying start to ask questions. That's where important stories can be told. I want to define what youth-driven journalism is, because you might hear, I think Portia mentioned, like, organizations that are youth-centered or youth-led. Youth-driven for us means that we don't say, hey, young person, you have a story. Hey, national outlet, you have a platform. Let's just mush you together and leave you. Because that's not really an authentic experience. You need to kind of bring those worlds together in a way where people can express themselves, and there's a definite power dynamic that you need to acknowledge. So as a producer, my role is I work really closely with young people. I'm participating from the moment they walk in the door for 6 months, and then when they have a story idea, I'm there with them. When they conduct their interviews, I'm on the calls with the editors to really make sure I'm holding that space where they can be successful in their storytelling. So youth-driven is not that we just have the youth do every single step, but it is an important point to say that our stories do mainly come from the young people. And speaking of stories, what I want to talk about today is a project that we did around the issue of gentrification, which I'm sure, especially here in DC, or if you're from Atlanta, Chicago, Philadelphia, all over the country, is a real issue in our communities. So this picture is from Oakland North, a local, hyper-local website, which I used to work at. And what you'll see here is that in Oakland, gentrification is happening at a really rapid pace. We're one of the most expensive rental markets in the country. And that's affecting our communities, particularly communities that are traditionally of color. And one of the factors in Oakland in particular that is thought to be driving this is the influx of the tech industry, which is bringing in people who are highly paid into communities. They're moving into places that rents are rising, and people are really angry and emotional and have stories to tell about it. When you look at gentrification, which is happening all over the country, you see it framed in different ways. And I'm not calling these out as being bad, but these are just narratives that you might see when telling these kinds of stories. So, from The Economist, looking at gentrification as a solely economic issue, or kind of doing a counter narrative being, oh, maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Looking at outlets, this is from the Bold Italic, which I actually love their design, but this article is looking at gentrification from a perspective of the gentrifier to other potential gentrifiers, which is one angle to the story, but there isn't a mention of this particular piece of the voices of people who are already living in these communities. And then you can look at it from, pulling back from the narrative, looking solely at the numbers, but I think all of us, we wouldn't be here if we didn't really strongly believe that narrative is an important part of making social change. So the project that we embarked on, this is our beta working title, what we first released under, which we called West Side Stories. I'm a little bit of a musical nerd, so I was like, yes, I love it. But it's about stories of gentrification from West Oakland. This was built by our Mobile Action Lab. We build interactives for web and for mobile. And I should say that we are also funded by MacArthur. This work would not be possible without them. And what the story came out of was conversations with our young people. I was in a pitch session with them, which looks like I sit around and I'm like, what do you think about stuff? What do you want to talk about? And it really came out, a lot of our young folks live in West Oakland, which is right next to San Francisco, across the bay. It's an area that is a historically Black neighborhood that is rapidly, rapidly changing. And they said, I want to tell the story of what's happening all around me. And I want to introduce to you, I wish he could be here because I feel like he would do a much better job than me, but this is Sinai Al-Kabelan. He's 18. That's him right there with the awesome hair. And he did an interesting take on this story by he lives in West Oakland. We had David Green from NPR, that's him in the center, come and do a week's worth of Morning Edition from our studios in downtown Oakland. And he pitched to David Green that he wanted to take him on a tour of his neighborhood and talk about the changes that he was seeing. And this is a quote from part of our research when we were reporting on this issue. West Oakland is ground zero for gentrification, but the whole city is affected, including downtown, where Uber is ready to expand to its huge headquarters. So this was a news peg also that got people thinking about it. So rather than me tell you about what Sinai thought, I'm going to back off for a little bit and play a bit of the tour that aired on Morning Edition, where Sinai is taking David Green on a tour of our area downtown and a little bit of his area in West Oakland.
And I'm David Green in Oakland, California. I'm hosting the show this week from Youth Radio. It's a news organization for journalists as young as 14. Going back to the early 90s, this has been an outlet for students, getting them off sometimes troubled streets to tell stories about their communities. Adults talk a lot about issues affecting young people, education, race, social media. Well, this week, we're going to let young journalists do the talking. I met up with one in downtown Oakland where you can hear the economic revival. I was standing with reporter Sinai Al-Kabelan in front of an old building that will soon be a part of Uber's headquarters. Sinai's 18 years old. He's proud of his hometown, Oakland. It's a diverse city. It's going through this cultural and economic renaissance, but it is feeling the pressure of gentrification, and Sinai's seen his neighborhood change.
There's a lot of families in West Oakland that are being pushed out because the prices are going up of housing. It's a miracle that my family is still there. I never thought that I'd walk into my liquor store, which is where poor working class people go to get small food items and things like that. But I never thought that I'd walk into my liquor store and I'd be the only person of color or black person there.
Okay, so you're actually going to take me to an interview we're going to do together at the library?
Right, yeah. We're going to go see Dorothy Lazard, who is the head of the history room at the Oakland Public Library.
Cool.
So this is the Oakland History Room. This is my lair, as it were.
Dorothy Lazard is a historian, though she knows the tension in present-day Oakland firsthand as a black woman in an increasingly white neighborhood. She had some workers over to paint her house recently. An alarm went off. The police arrived, and she felt like they were skeptical that she was the homeowner.
The entire encounter, he had his hand on his gun, like he didn't believe that I actually lived there.
And does that affect your sense of belonging, where there's people who are in your neighborhood who are looking at you as if you're an outsider?
No, it doesn't change my sense of belonging. If Oakland has, and seeing the changes in Oakland has done anything for me, it's confirmed for me that I will not be moved off my patch, because I absolutely know how I got to be here.
It strikes me that we are sitting in one of America's most integrated cities at a moment when this country is confronting racism in a very real way. What do you think is at stake in Oakland?
What would be at stake is if we miss the opportunity to be brave, finally. Because Californians think they're tolerant when it comes to racial issues, and we're really not. Largely, we're avoidant. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I don't want you to make me feel uncomfortable. We need to start having some really hard conversations about how that racial climate you refer to makes us feel.
That was Dorothy Lazard of the Oakland Public Library, along with youth radio reporter Sinai Alkebalan.
Okay, so a couple things really strike me about this moment. One is that this narrative, I did not hear this narrative in most coverage of gentrification. The narrative is the question, do I belong? Yeah, I belong. Mostly the assumption is that people are being pushed out, that we've already finished the question, do I belong? No, people don't belong anymore, and now everybody's leaving. And that wasn't the narrative that we were finding in the communities. It's not the narrative that Sinai wanted to tell. And I really think that, to the point that was made here in the end, have the hard conversation, be brave, have these awkward conversations. That really was the premise for the interactive that we wanted to build. So I should say a couple things about this process. So young people coded this, they designed it, they did the research. You'll hear Sinai in a couple of these interviews. Those may seem like technical details, making decisions like mobile versus desktop. Those matter when it comes to participatory journalism. And they matter because, for example, when Sinai and I went out to talk to people, when you get to the design phase, when you get to the coding phase, it matters if you can be on your cell phone and walk through these neighborhoods. That could be poverty tourism if it's for mobile, versus for desktop when you're exploring in a different way. The design aesthetic that you're about to see matters because if everything's in graffiti font and everything has chain link fences, you're reinforcing narratives that may not be authentic, that aren't challenged. They're just reinforcing the same stereotypes that is already out there in the media. And that's something we were very intentional about based on feedback from the community, from young people who live there. And the social aspect is so important. We've heard that where if you include an aspect where people have to make a decision to share, to have conversations with each other, you're starting to move past, once again, people being consumers of your media and start to participate in it. So this was the beta that actually ran. It's called West Side Stories. I'll play a little. This will kind of go as I'm speaking of what it looks like if you're going to go check this out. So it was map-based, but it was designed for desktop. So once again, you wouldn't be on your phone like wandering into a neighborhood just to like look around. But based on feedback that we got, it was important to kind of note the history of a place and to kind of, if you think of studies, it was cross-sectional. I wanted to capture a moment in time of a community that is undergoing rapid change. And I want to play for you a couple pieces of media that live in here, which includes video, this includes some text. Note the illustrations, which are done by young people. And if you live in these communities, you'll kind of know landmarks that might be familiar to you. We wanted to make sure that we captured different types of voices in this community. And Sinai really drove this because he still had that question of, do I still belong? And he talked to his neighbor, who goes by Miss Cookie, Joyce Elaine Carter, and when he was making this app, we said, who might we talk to? He said, this lady is the best. I go and see her all the time. I want to ask her what she's seen in our neighborhood. I'm going to play a little bit of that for you now.
My name is Joyce Elaine Carter. I stay at Campbell Street, Oakland, California. 37 years at this address. There used to be blacks all in the neighborhood in the early 2000s. But then they all moved away. So now it's mostly all whites. It's like 4 blacks on the block now. Well, a lot of the people that had the houses, like the old people had the houses and stuff, they died and they left the houses to the children, and children turned around and sold their mother houses and stuff. That was stupid. Now all these white people coming down here buying up all their houses, and I don't think that's right. So I'm staying right here where I'm at. I paid $15,000 for my house, and I'm staying right here. I ain't going nowhere.
I love her. And so in terms, again, challenging the narrative that you may see in the media, this is a different narrative of I'm staying, while acknowledging that other people are not making that decision. One of the biggest challenges of building this interactive was trying to find voices of people who are coming into the neighborhood. Sinai shared with me when we were brainstorming this that he had had new neighbors move in just a couple houses down from him. They had moved in over a year ago, and they had never had a conversation. And he really wanted to have a conversation with new neighbors, asking, who are you? How come you haven't come and gotten to know me? Let me get to know you. Why are you moving to this neighborhood? And as a reporting challenge, we had a hard time getting people to talk to us because of some of these barriers. So we actually staked out an open house in the neighborhood, and we just kind of camped out there, and we just talked to everybody who wanted to buy the house, and quite a few people talked to us. And it was really interesting, and Sinai kind of drove those conversations. I'm going to play just one of them. We talked to, I think, 5 or 6 different people, and that was probably some of my favorite parts of our reporting.
So what kind of things are you guys looking for in houses in this area?
I guess something that's at least move-in ready, and maybe a place where we can make some income, like having a Airbnb or a rental property.
Yeah, I think that's the same for me, in a neighborhood that maybe has a little bit more diversity, a little bit more flavor than what we've been able to find in the San Francisco side.
Okay, so what we're trying to build is a portrait of a place. And I should say we talked to several people who are trying to move in to that particular house saying, I live in another part of Oakland, I want to raise a family here, and this is where I can afford to build a house. And part of that storytelling is that this is a complex issue. It's not, bad, evil people over here and like good people over here. It's people who have various reasons for making the decisions they have, and we're kind of just standing back and letting people explore it within the context of this interactive. And that was something also driven by the young people, that we shouldn't editorialize too much. We should allow people to explore, and that's, once again, the interactive part of what we're building. So we released it, and it went so well that we started getting emails and calls from other people in our community here in Oakland, we're not in Oakland, saying, how come you're not doing this in East Oakland? Why don't you tell the story of Chinatown, of downtown? All these places are changing, going back to Sinai's earlier quote, that it's not just those neighborhoods being affected, it's the entire community that is affected. And so we started expanding. We expanded to 27 stories across Oakland. You can check out Oaktown stories online. Chinatown, Lake Merritt, downtown East Oakland, other places that are experiencing different factors that drive change, really building this interactive portrait of a place. And this is just a little bit of the screenshot. You can see map got bigger. We try to go and approach the storytelling from capacity building, which means you look not at the weaknesses, you look at also strengths in the community. Gotta give a shout out to the Warriors, look at our strengths, that kind of thing. Because that's important to note, when you look at a community and it's complex, you want to look at the good and the bad, because that is part of life. Since this is a narrative-driven conference, I kind of have to go back to Sinai, because part of our work in Participate is with people in the community. I forgot to point it out, but in our interactive, there's a big plus button on the side. That's so you can add your own story to the map. So another level of participation. But Sinai, who was 18 when he started working on this, really got into the question of, do I belong? And he came out with the conclusion that for him, he absolutely belonged in this community. And just to kind of show you where he's at now, he's working at Youth Radio. He's working on our video department. He also launched his own business. He believed that there should be more Black-owned businesses in Oakland, and that there was a place for him. This is his website. And looking at the factors like tech that I mentioned are driving, in some sense, gentrification. There's a sense that tech and communities of color don't go together. I love this is his new t-shirt that he just designed, which, with binary code in Africa. And I feel like talking to Denai before I came out here, he wanted to show that those things don't have to be at odds for him. And looking at our own coverage of how gentrification is playing out in Oakland, by the way, we did not solve gentrification, just like a hint, like that's not the conclusion of this talk. But the conversation is changing, which is not just us, but we're a part of this, reporting and having people participate. It's no longer the conversation of how will tech change Oakland. There's a question now of how will Oakland change tech? How do communities come back and actually flip that narrative? And if you're following the Uber Oakland story, you can see that they're actually participating more in, I'm not saying that like, yay, it's solved, but there are more conversations going on with companies coming in, thinking that we're not just on an inevitable path to pushing out people who have lived in the community forever. And I want to end by acknowledging that, I'm here on stage, I get to have the immense privilege of working with really talented young people who drove this storytelling as designers, as coders, as journalists. I wish they could be here today to tell you about their work. But yeah, it's something where we're hoping to expand. We already started doing more of these narratives, capturing gentrification stories in Los Angeles. We did a trip in Philadelphia. So I'm hoping the narrative will continue. I'm hoping the participation will continue. And I thank you very much for your time tonight.